Thank you all so much for joining me for my session on how cybersecurity, edge analytics, and AI have impacted the design and implementation of physical security systems. I am Antoinette King. I am a newly certified CISSP. I'm also a PSP, DPPS, and SICC. And what that all means is I'm super passionate about physical and cybersecurity and want to learn as much as I can in order to help all of my customers and constituents. I started in the physical security industry back in the very early 2000s after I got a bachelor's degree in managing security systems. And I started out as a technician because not my bachelor's degree, but because I had some computer training. I got my MCSE back when Windows NT was the operating system of choice. So I'm dating myself a little bit. But I spent about 17 years in the security industry when I started to realize that we weren't doing a really great job at securing endpoint devices. As we transitioned technology to network devices, it became evident to me that we all needed to do a better job. So I went back to school and got my master's in cyber policy and risk analysis. And it was then that I realized that my passion for security, first of all, had been reignited, but I started seeing things I couldn't unsee. And so working within those two domains in order to bridge the gap really became the primary mission for me. And that's when I founded Credo Cyber Consulting in 2020. I do have two incredible young boys. One is at Fordham College, the other one's in high school. And of course, my little fur baby, Avery, keeps us busy and always keeps me on my toes. Last October, I had the very great opportunity to publish my first book called The Digital Citizen's Guide to Cybersecurity: How to Stay Safe and Empowered Online. And the purpose of that book was to make cybersecurity more relatable to the average everyday person. It was inspired by a presentation actually that I did a few years back for 4th and 5th graders during a digital learning day, when I realized that young people have the aptitude to understand how to be safe online, but aren't given the tools. So again, it's a non-technical, very anecdotal book that has a bunch of checklists and things that you can work with everybody from age 12 to 100. So I encourage you to purchase the book if you have the opportunity. So today we're going to go through a few things, first starting with legacy security system design, and then talking more about the role of IoT in security and how that came about. We'll talk about the changing landscape of what it looks like today, and then a little bit about what the future holds. So we'll just go through a bit of a timeline for the security industry. First, I want to talk about legacy security designs, because in order to have a better understanding of how we got to where we are today, we need to understand where we came from. When I started in this industry, security systems were standalone. They were purpose-built and they were analog. Video and access control systems required extensive infrastructure, power supplies for all of the devices, and a tremendous amount of installation labor. Technicians needed to be skilled in not only physical implementation of systems, but they needed some minimal computer skills, because there were some things that had to be programmed, but not necessarily networked. So they didn't need networking skills, they just needed a little bit of knowledge of how to work with computers. In the very early 2000s, I remember the first time I was able to connect an access control panel to a network. I installed an encoder board on the motherboard, and that meant that I no longer had to walk from panel to panel with a serial cable and a laptop to make programming changes. So I was super excited about that. Legacy systems were closed, meaning proprietary. They were costly to scale and reactive. So once you started working with a particular manufacturer, typically you were locked into that manufacturer for the lifetime of that system. Investigations took a very long time. We had to go through hours and hours of video first, whether it was on tape, and then even when we started transitioning over to digital video recorders, it took a long time to review video because there was no way to find when an incident happened. So as we moved towards the digital video recorder, it was easier to fast forward because we didn't have tapes and we didn't have to switch tapes necessarily, but it did still take a really long time. And finally, we didn't pay much attention to what we call today lifecycle management because we adopted the philosophy, if it isn't broke, we don't fix it. We only upgraded firmware if the device was not functioning. And this little bit of information is really, really important. So keep that in the back of your head when we start looking at the future and the current state of security systems. As time and tech progressed, we transitioned from coax and 18.2 cables to encoders and server-based solutions. First, we started encoding cameras to the digital video recorder, but ultimately cameras and card readers started becoming network devices. Locks transitioned from these large, very power intensive and difficult to install devices to wireless and battery operated. Technicians began needing not only the skills to physically install these devices, but also a basic understanding of networking. Learning how to program switches, IP address devices, what subnet masks were, gateways and DNS servers, and also setting up network segments were added to the toolbox of the security technician. But manufacturers also started to recognize the need for more integrated solutions, and they started opening up their technology to other technologies through something called an API. That allowed for a best-in-breed implementation to provide more actionable data and really more efficient systems. Power over Ethernet reduced the cost of installation by reducing the amount of cabling required. Power supplies became completely obsolete, and it was much faster to install. These systems were primarily reactive, but they did provide more business intelligence with the use of strategic analytics. And I say strategic analytics because sensors still didn't have the compute power to have analytics on the edge. So we had to process analytics locally through an appliance. Investigations became less labor intensive, and other departments such as marketing and HR could find uses for this data. And we no longer needed to have to be on site to access this system data like we did in the legacy systems, because now we were able to remotely connect through client applications. So this was really exciting for us in the security industry, being able to be off-site, doing something else, and then also having access to systems gave us the ability to be a little bit more towards the reactive scale. I'm sorry, proactive scale. So today, we're seeing a rapidly changing landscape in the security industry. There's a transition from server-based solutions to edge and cloud computing. Analytics are being installed right into the sensors, removing the need for separate servers and separate compute power. This also makes systems far easier to scale and less costly. In the past, servers had a finite limitation to the number of video streams that they could process. Once you hit that threshold, new servers needed to be purchased. Camera licenses and base software licenses were also needed, adding another additional cost. One camera could cost thousands of dollars if you needed to add it to the system. And this caused the security professionals to have to make very difficult decisions as to whether or not they really needed that camera installed. And that could be at the detriment of the organization. Today, all it requires is an available port on a switch, some cable, and the labor to install the device. Analytics are becoming more sophisticated, providing proactive data and the ability to predict behaviors. And with the increased compute power at the edge, we're also able to put those analytics right onto the cameras and the devices. Systems are now fully integrated, providing a single pane of glass for the security professional. And this really gives them the ability to be more efficient. The security integrator now needs to have a much stronger understanding of complex network systems and the end customer's environments. With the increased regulations in many industries, they also need to understand what kinds of technologies and analytics are even legal to use in the jurisdictions that they serve. Facial recognition, for example, is a really hot topic in a lot of states. And the way that those states actually even define what facial recognition or biometrics are is different from state to state. And then when you're talking about international regulations such as GDPR, global organizations really need to look carefully at how they implement technology throughout their systems. and what that impact could have on them from a legal perspective. So what does this mean for the future of security? All of these sensors have increased the attack vector for bad actors. We also need to think about the hybrid attack methodology. Not only are we allowing people to potentially have access to our devices to hack them, but they can also potentially have access devices for actionable intelligence against executives or particular organizations. So perhaps they don't want to just hack devices to commit ransomware. Maybe they're using those devices to garner information to plan a physical attack. Or if they are planning a physical attack, they gain control over that technology to actually turn it off or use it for their benefit, like unlocking doors. There needs to be a shift from the old mindset of we're going to just set it and forget it. Lifecycle management needs to be the core of every integrator's business model. There needs to be a transition to a more managed services model of business. When devices are installed, there is a life cycle that needs to be addressed, including firmware upgrades, end of life, and end of support. Firmware upgrades are no longer just to fix bugs, but they really typically are to fix security issues and security flaws. And if we are not paying attention to the devices that we install by upgrading their firmware, we are now providing wide open portals for bad actors to access our customers' networks. The integrator needs to support the end customer throughout the life cycle of the solutions that they install. It is incumbent on them to take on that responsibility and also to be able to communicate why it's important to the end customer. As the end customer's business needs change, the integrator needs to be able to adapt, and support them. The technology that we're installing is no longer used just for a single purpose. With the use of analytics, we are seeing big data enter into the security industry. The use of information provided by the security technology is useful for the overall business mission. For example, in a retail environment, a security camera can also support a more positive customer experience. Using the camera, a loitering analytic, and an IP speaker, the company can have an automated alert if somebody is lingering by a product for an extensive period of time. And an announcement can come over the loudspeaker saying that customer needs support in a particular area. It's proactive security in the fact that if the person was considering stealing, that they would think twice knowing that they're being monitored. But if the customer really was confused about a product or couldn't make their mind up as to which product that they wanted to purchase, they're going to leave feeling attended to and probably be more likely to come back and also recommend that organization or company to a friend or family member. As I mentioned earlier, all of this technology increases the attack vector of the organization. It is essential that the security integrator understand how to secure the endpoint devices and cloud solutions that they're implementing. Partnering with manufacturers that provide ways to secure their technology is also very important. Things like secure elements, signed firmware, and encryption for data at rest and in transit are just some of the things that you should be looking for when partnering with a technology manufacturer. The security technician needs to be much stronger now with a background in cybersecurity and information security to be able to navigate the challenges faced with implementing secure IoT. As we transition many of the compute power to the cloud, we need to understand what our responsibilities are for securing the cloud instance. There are different levels of security depending on the services that you pay for. And you need to understand the kind of service that you're actually purchasing. Are you purchasing infrastructure as a service, software as a service, or a platform as a service? Depending on which one of these services that you're purchasing is going to predicate who's responsible for what when it comes to securing data. Some providers may have strong security elements, but they're just defaulted to off. Who's responsible for turning them on? Some of those responsibilities may be that of the provider, and others may be the responsibility of the user. So reading your user agreements carefully and also asking lots of questions to make sure that you've got all bases covered is really important. Finally, all of this smart technology will provide organizations with a tremendous amount of data. With that aggregation comes great responsibility to protect the privacy of the data subjects. End users and integrators need to be mindful of the privacy laws in the jurisdictions they serve. Just as I mentioned earlier about the laws around analytics and biometrics, understanding what privacy means in the jurisdiction that you're serving will also help you to make sure that you're implementing systems that will be within the legal confines of that jurisdiction. It's really important as we look forward in the security industry to make sure that there isn't an us against them attitude when it comes to physical and cybersecurity. What we really need to recognize is that with the advent of all of this technology, one dovetails so well within the other. They're really two sides of the same coin. So understanding that all of the principles of physical security and cybersecurity are the same, the only difference is what the asset that we're protecting, will help us to really work well and closely with both domains rather than kind of pushing one off or not including one of those domains within the overall design and implementation of a security solution. If we make sure that all of the stakeholders are at the table from day one, the ultimate goal is to make sure that the end customer is protected. And I think that that really will happen. So as we move forward into the future of security, my hope is that we no longer have physical security and cybersecurity, but it really is truly one holistic enterprise security program that includes both elements, because when you look at cybersecurity, there is a physical security element to that, making sure that the infrastructure is protected with physical security measures. And when we look at physical security, now that we are so IoT dependent and network dependent, we cannot be secure as a domain if we don't make sure that the technology that we're implementing is secured. So I'm hoping that moving forward, we can look towards this joint security program. With that, this is my contact information. If you're interested in reaching out and getting more information about what we do at Credo Cyber, by all means, please do. Thank you. Now I'm open to questions.
So hi, Antoinette. Thank you for joining us for another session at Security Bio Live. So you provided incredible insight yesterday during the Women in Security keynote panel discussion and have just delivered another engaging session on cybersecurity today. I had a couple of questions to go through with you for our Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So as I've mentioned, you're participating in both our panels and solo sessions for this year's event. So why did you want to get involved in Security Bio Live?
For me, it was the international aspect of the audience. I think it's really important that we, when we're evangelizing for these topics, that we go broader than just the normal scope of where we're speaking. And so for me, that was the biggest attraction. I was really excited to be able to participate in something that was on a global scale.
Oh, well, we appreciate that, and we're always happy to have you as well. So in terms of the Q&A, I firstly wanted to just pause momentarily on the book you released that you spoke about, as that's such an incredible achievement. So the message to provide a cybersecurity guide to everyone is a very difficult and inspiring feat. I'm interested to learn how this has actually been received by market, as obviously recruitment and upskilling in the industry is quite a big issue at the moment.
Yeah, so it's been received very, very well. And it's funny, I do workshops at schools, and I've recently did a workshop at my library, and the youngest person in the workshop was in their 60s, and they range from 60 to 80s. I was so impressed by the elderly community, the fact that they showed up for this presentation and this training, because I think that, you know, when we look at the greater threat landscape, it's no longer nation state actor against nation state actor militarily, but nation states are going after individual citizens for a myriad of reasons, whether it's to just garner their bank account information, love scams, or that individual happens to be somebody that works for an organization. So when we think about the threat landscape for the organization, it extends all the way out to the employees and the individuals. And so for me, just teaching people how to just work within their day-to-day lives to secure themselves, their devices, and their data is also going to improve the way that they secure the data at their work, their place of employment, or where they volunteer, or if the kid goes to school, right? So I think if we have a better educated public individuals about how to secure their devices and their information, it's just going to bleed into the organizations and make them more secure.
And it's a very digital world that we live in. You can't escape it, even down to, make an appointment at the doctor's, for example. Primarily that's done, on the computer or across the internet or digital banking. It's something that plays into everyone's everyday lives. So those types of digital workshops are something that's really important. And similarly, something that we're doing over here in the UK, which is probably quite similar to the US as well, is the government's trying to tackle digital accessibility, like you said, whether it's, people from the older generation or children in school or in financial hardship. So you mentioned that the audience for your book is primarily, young adults and children. But does this also include those who have limited access to the internet, who may not be as knowledgeable or digitally savvy as a lot of other people?
Yeah, that's actually the primary goal, is to go after the people that aren't digitally savvy, that don't have access, because for me, those are the most vulnerable. So every chapter actually has an actionable checklist of things that you can do, depending on what that chapter subject matter was, that you can do to improve your everyday life. And it's everything from cyberbullying to, love scams, like I said before. So, and even cultivation of positive content. I think there's so much in there when we talk about, how we consume and produce content online. But one thing that's really important to realize is the reason why this is super, super important to the individual is that I'm working with a few companies that are 100% bring your own device. So what does that mean? That means that these employees are using their own personal devices to conduct business. They're also using those devices to be online, to go on social media, to do their personal banking and whatever. So if they don't understand the importance of not connecting to public Wi-Fi without a VPN, and they're also, they're doing their personal business and the business for your organization and your company, it becomes a big risk for organizations. So yes, it definitely is something that was designed for people who have limited access and are not technology savvy, but it also is designed with the understanding that a lot of organizations are moving to bring your own device. It's less expensive, there's no infrastructure to maintain, and with the adoption of cloud computing, it makes it very easy to scale quickly globally.
I mean, wow, that was quite shocking for me, actually, because in my experience, obviously, I'm a slightly separate industry, but it's the opposite. You would expect, don't do anything personal on your work computer, don't do anything work related on your personal computer, so on and so forth, because of that, those privacy concerns. So to hear that, I mean, yes, 100%, there needs to be that guidance installed in place and that infrastructure in terms of knowledge imparted throughout the industry and the public. And I'd be very interested, actually, to have a look at your book. I mean, my wife runs a government program to help, digitalize people in the local communities. So it's something that's definitely something that we're passionate about. So I'd love to get my hands on a copy.
Absolutely.
But just to go back to your presentation. So I'll dive into that a little bit. So you discussed the changing landscape of physical security and the transition to the edge and cloud computing. Are those two options as reliable as having like a physical server room, for example? And is a multi-layered approach the best option for organizations that are perhaps, of smaller scale or don't have the best network connection?
Yeah, so the answer to that is maybe yes and no. So is it more reliable? It depends on the location in the world, right? What kind of network connectivity they have? Do they have redundancy? One thing I can say from a video perspective, because there's also access control and intrusion detection, which requires far less bandwidth. But let's just say if we're focusing on video, one of the things we really need to be cognizant of is the notion that, we've been moving towards towards all these multi-megapixel cameras, giving you tons and tons of resolution so you can digitally zoom in. Well, when you adopt a cloud solution, you lose those megapixels. You're not storing, a 10 megapixel camera anymore. It's typically 1 or 2 megapixels that you're actually storing. A lot of the solutions on the video side of things are edge recording and then cloud archiving. So essentially they keep 30 days of recording on the edge device on an SD card, solid state drive, something like that, and then we'll export the video to the cloud for long-term storage. That to me is where I see the current state of the industry, so that you can access the real image quality from the device. And it makes it, again, more scalable because the storage is smaller. It's on the device versus having large arrays on site that have to be managed, updated, like I said, with firmware and all of that. So layered approach is absolutely probably the best way to go. Of course, we always have to be concerned if we lose connectivity. For decades now, most cameras have SD card slots. So if they did lose connectivity, even internally within the network from the server, when they were recording to servers, they could store locally for a limited period of time. But I am seeing that the recording is being done at the edge and then typically archived off. Sometimes it's streaming directly, but it's not typical.
And in those kind of situations that you've mentioned, if for example, it's storing 30 days worth of footage, is that including, 30 days every single hour of footage, or is it only saving in most scenarios, obviously, a clip, for example, that has detected motion, detected a person or a car or a vehicle, etc.?
Yeah, so you have the option to do either one. Typically, it's activity-based. So you set the sensitivity. Analytics are often involved. Sometimes there's mechanical triggers, like a door is opened or light switch turned on, or even audio is detected and it'll trigger a recording. So typically we do it based on activity-based recording, but you can, if you have enough storage, if you have the capacity to do so, you can just store 24/7.
And one of the other biggest trends that you mentioned in your presentation is the convergence of cyber and physical security. So although this poses the additional risks of attackers, attacking both cyber and physical, like you mentioned, how can the edge or cloud computing help mitigate these risks?
Well, a few things. Number one, by not having one set of credentials for the entire network, you can kind of defray some of the risk, but also having the ability to manage the cloud remotely, building in the different technologies that the cloud provider will give you in order to kind of provide those layers, because oftentimes there are far more sophisticated security in the cloud than there would necessarily be on site. But it also can increase that risk if you do not understand and know how to secure the devices properly. So it is a double-edged sword, right? You can absolutely mitigate some of the risks and threats, but you can increase them as well if you're really not clear and have a clear understanding of the technology that you're using. I mentioned about partnering with manufacturers that have these security features within their devices. That's a great way to mitigate it. If you're using technology that has the ability to mitigate, improper firmware or uses, encryption and video in transit or data in transit, then that's going to mitigate a lot of those risks. But if you're using a technology that doesn't have that, or that has backdoors or default usernames and passwords, that's where you're going to start increasing that risk.
Well, thank you, Antoinette. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. It's always a pleasure. And if anyone has any further questions, please obviously reach out to Antoinette on the platform or after the event. And stay tuned for our next session where we'll meet again, Antoinette, alongside fellow Lead Her event co-chair Elaine Palone. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.